Ted Paul asks, do you agree that CBC News has an inherent liberal bias? No, I don't, Ted.
The CBC reports on a tough battle between the New Democrats and the United Conservatives as Alberta heads to the polls on April 16th. But has the national broadcaster revealed its party preference within its reporting? I'm your host, B.A. Jarvis, and you are watching The Golden Door. Alright, we're back. So, with the Alberta election scheduled for just 3 weeks from today, I thought there was no better time to launch what will likely be a series of videos analyzing the journalistic arm of the CBC in relation to its objectivity. Now, to set the table, so to speak, for this analysis, I think it's important to provide some historical context for politics in Alberta. The last provincial election in the province was in May 2015, which resulted in the New Democratic Party capturing 54 of the 87 legislative seats, securing a majority government and ending 44 years of consecutive Conservative rule within the province. To put it into further context, this was only the fourth change in government since the province was formed in 1905. The Progressive Conservatives themselves came to power in 1971 under then Premier Peter Lougheed, after ousting the Social Credit Party after 36 years, a party based on conservative Christian values and the theory of social credit. I didn't know much about this philosophy before making the video, so please forgive this brief detour to explain quickly what it is. Social credit is an interdisciplinary and distributed philosophy developed by C.H. Douglas, a British engineer who published a book by that name in 1924. It encompasses economics, political science, history, and accounting. Its policies are designed, according to Douglas, to distribute economic and political power to individuals. Douglas wrote, "Systems were made for men and not men for systems, and the interest of man, which is self-development, is above all systems, whether theological, political, or economic." Douglas said that social creditors want to build a new civilization based on absolute economic security for the individual, where they shall sit every man under his vine and under his fig tree, and none shall make them afraid. In his words, what we really demand of existence is not that we shall be put under somebody else's utopia, but we shall be put in a position to construct a utopia of our own. The Social Credit Party was considered tired and complacent after many years of rule, as well as too rural for the changing demographic landscape of Alberta. After a snap election was called in 1971, the Progressive Conservatives, while only finishing a few percentage points ahead of the Social Credit Party, managed to capture the majority of both urban centres of Edmonton and Calgary, securing 49 legislative seats. As Premier of Alberta, Lougheed furthered the development of oil and gas resources and started the Alberta Heritage Fund to ensure the exploitation of non-renewable resources would be a long-term benefit of Alberta. He introduced the Alberta Bill of Rights and established a political dynasty that would last until 2015. After the social credit collapsed, the largest opposition the Conservatives would face was in 1986 to 1993, where the NDP was the official opposition with 16 of 87 seats, their largest showing until Rachel Notley came to power in 2015. So how did it happen? Well, there's an old saying in Canadian politics: we don't vote people in, we vote people out. By 2008, dissatisfaction with the governing Conservatives was on the rise. Like any political party which remains in power too long, mounting political scandals and economic blunders led voters to look for alternatives. This led to the formation of the Wild Rose Party, named after the provincial flower of Alberta. A conservative party by any measure, the Wild Rose Party ran on a platform of election and healthcare reform while attempting to downplay many of the social conservative views of the party base. By 2012, under the leadership of Danielle Smith, the party had grown into a provincial force, capturing 17 legislative seats and, more importantly, over 34% of the popular vote, becoming the official opposition under what would be the final progressive government led by Jim Prentice. So as you can see, by the 2010s, the right-wing vote was split considerably within Alberta, but this alone does not explain the NDP's rise to power in 2015. It could be argued that their win can be attributed to one major political event in 2014, when 9 Wild Rose MPs, including party leader Danielle Smith, crossed the floor and joined the Progressive Conservative Party. The move was advertised by Prentice as a reunification of the Conservative family, with many political observers at the time calling it one of the most deft political victories in the history of Canada. However, the Wild Rose base was outraged. You see, the Wild Rose Party represented the strongest opposition the Progressive Conservatives had faced in perhaps 40 years, and the move sent a clear message that a Conservative Party could not be relied on to fill the duties required of an official opposition, setting the stage for the electorate to teach both parties a broad lesson in 2015. With staunch conservative support still split between the two-party alternatives, and disenfranchised voters desperate for a party who could provide strong opposition to a historically conservative government, there was one final factor that ensured it was the NDP who benefited from an electorate hungry for change. You see, 3 years prior, the federal New Democratic Party had posted the strongest showing in the history of their party. Under the charismatic leader Jack Layton, the NDP rode a wave which became known within Canada as the Orange Crush, capturing over 30% of the popular vote and becoming the official opposition for the first time in history. Icing on the cake was popular leader Rachel Notley, able to boast a pedigree of sorts due to her father Grant Notley being the leader of the provincial NDP from 1968 to 1984, even becoming the official opposition in 1982 with a mere 2 seats in the legislature. So there we have it, the perfect storm that allowed the NDP to take power in 2015, but unfortunately for the party, it was not to last. The Progressive Conservative Party and the Wild Rose Party merged in 2017 to form the United Conservative Party under former federal cabinet minister Jason Kenney, once again uniting the right-wing vote in the province. But have the political demographics in Alberta shifted enough in the last 4 years to give the NDP a fighting chance against the United Conservative Front? 2018 polls were not favorable, and with the election legally mandated to be called before the end of May 2019, Kenney's United Conservatives have been eager to put what they call an accidental government to another test. Notley's NDP seemed on the ropes. However, when a political scandal broke earlier this month regarding the leadership race of the United Conservative Party, which Kenney took the helm over former Wild Rose leader Brian Jean, Notley saw her opportunity and called the election for April 16th. The allegation is that Jeff Callaway, former Wild Rose Party president, entered the leadership race as a kamikaze candidate in order to attack Brian Jean and subsequently drop out of the race in support of Kenney. Now, at this point, I want to highlight the differences in the CBC coverage of both parties in just the short time it's been since the election was called. So keep in mind, all of these stories have been published within the last 2 weeks on CBC. So the first one, ex-UCP board member said he was bullied out of the party for helping election commissioner investigation. Mark Hudson says he is helping investigation into Jeff Callaway's kamikaze leadership campaign. RCMP takes over investigation of United Conservative Party irregular finance contribution allegations. Alberta Election Commissioner identified potential violations outside his jurisdiction. Kenney, Callaway campaigns collaborated to attack Brian Jean during the UCP leadership race, leaked documents show. UCP executive Janice Harrington says campaign communication was perfectly normal and within the rules. Notley slams Kenney, UCP, in Edmonton Strathcona nomination speech. Notley says election will not be postponed as allegations dog UCP. Optimistic Alberta throne speech could set the stage for election call. Premier Rachel Notley intends to call spring vote by end of May. Former Alberta UCP candidate who helped execute kamikaze campaign asked for judicial inquiry into Kenney's role. Happy Man says he was at the meeting with UCP leader Jason Kenney where plan was devised. Alberta government touts record of restoring trust in pre-election throne speech. Province must go to the polls by end of May. Inside Alberta's House of Cards scandal. Rachel Notley and Jason Kenney go head-to-head as Alberta election called for April 16th. NDP touts love and hope and optimism as UCP talks jobs, economy, pipelines. The podcast, How the Alberta NDP Won in 2015 and What They Face Today. Sally Hauser, press secretary to Rachel Notley in 2015, talks about the NDP's upset victory. Can the Alberta NDP repeat its 2015 victory? Governing this province should be an honor, not an inheritance. This is the rage of a province that knows the world is changing around it. Alberta NDP unveils $25 per day childcare promise. Plan builds on pilot project that covered thousands of spaces across the province. Alberta votes, campaign demographics breaking down the party numbers. NDP the only party to achieve gender parity. UCP has higher number of visible minorities. Notley promises extra $90 million a year to reduce waits for surgery, emergency care. NDP announces plan for 10-bed mental health crisis unit at Foothills Hospital. So, let's contrast this with how they're portraying the UCP coverage. So in contrast to the neutral to, some might say, positive coverage that the NDP is enjoying on the CBC website, let's see what they're saying about the United Conservatives. Opinion: mean, petty, and vengeful. Gotcha video reflects badly on UPC. It smacks of something an authoritarian government would do. UCP government would cancel AHS Super Lab in Edmonton. Lab would be run by Alberta Health Services, not private company under NDP plan. UCP pitches $30 permit fees for trail users if Kenney elected Alberta Premier. Campers, people using off-highway vehicles, would need to pay yearly permit. UCP candidate who called climate change good thing for some says, quote, out of context. Climate change for some is a really bad thing. For others, it's a pretty good thing, she said. Conservative politicians urge Alberta's right to stay united amid talk of Brian Jean's return. Personal ambition and fighting old battles must take a back seat, tweeted Stephen Harper. Star UCP candidate resigns in wake of leaked messages about white supremacists. Calgary Mountain View candidate Kaylin Ford argues there's a double standard for white supremacist terrorists, and this one is particularly bad. I almost did a video on this particular story in its entirety, and I still might. Star UCP candidate who resigned over white supremacist comments also questioned the value of pride parades. Jason Kenney condemned Caitlin Ford for lamenting replacement of white peoples in their homelands. Climate change caused by humans, but those who disagree welcome in UCP, says Kenney. United Conservative Party leader also vows to hold referendum on equalization payments. Calgary UCP candidate drops out as bully threatens to reveal her social media posts on migrant rape crisis. Eva Kyriakos also tweeted kids shouldn't be brainwashed into accepting perversions in trans washroom debate. UCP leader Jason Kenney defends allowing parental notification if child joins GSA. Kenney has faced backlash from teachers, parents of LGBTQ children, and advocates. So GSA is a gay straight alliance in high schools. New UCP candidate under fire for link to Christian groups' conversion therapy style programs. Jeremy Wong, an ordained minister and new politician, denies supporting controversial methods. UCP leader Jason Kenney shrugs off RCMP investigation of political contributions. Political Science says growing scandal could harm UCP election campaign. UCP immigration plan would try to lure 10,000 newcomers a year to rural Alberta. Jason Kenney said the plan would help economy and halt population decline in rural areas. Now, this is far from an exhaustive list of articles published on both respective parties, but I would argue that it is representative, and more are being published every single day, and it will continue until the election. Now, I would argue that there is a clear and marked difference in the stories the CBC has chosen to cover, as well as the stark difference in tone of the headlines. And even if you believe that the United Conservatives are the only ones making political blunders, I think there's nothing that drives this point home more than taking a look at the poll tracker. So look at this poll. 51.5% of Albertans in favor of UCP, NDP 34.8%, Alberta Party 6.1%, Liberals 3.7%, and other 3.9%. Seat projections, probability of winning, a greater than 99% chance of winning the most seats for the United Conservative Party, and a less than 1% chance of the NDP winning the most seats. So, as I say, Jason Kenney's Conservatives enjoy a wide lead over Rachel Notley's New Democrats and are on pace to secure a big majority government. Neither the Alberta Party nor the Liberals are in position to seriously contest more than a handful of seats. And this has not changed over time. So look at this. All of the polls have been consistent. This is not something that is new. Every poll has them in the 50% range, which clinches them the victory, clinches them a huge victory. Now, I will add a caveat that polling in Alberta has been notoriously bad. In 2012, Wild Rose was predicted to end the 41-year consecutive reign of the Conservatives, with support polling upwards of 4 in 10 Albertans, but only managed to win 17 of 87 seats. In 2015, the polls were also outside the margin of error, with the NDP several points higher and the Conservatives several points lower than the actual election results. Nevertheless, it's still a greater than 99% certainty the UCP will form the next government in Alberta. So the question begs to be asked, why is the CBC pretending that this is still a two-horse race? I would argue they've shown their hand. Former CBC anchor Peter Mansbridge, featured at the start of this video, is technically correct. The CBC does not have a liberal bias, but they have a left-wing bias, and their coverage of this election cycle is just one of the many examples that illustrate the way this bias attempts to influence the political narrative in our country. Now, everyone has a bias, and the CBC is in no way the only Canadian media outlet that has been guilty of this kind of uneven coverage. But as our national, state-funded broadcaster, the CBC has to be held to a higher standard. There are people in the comment section of the CBC that are calling conservatism and conservative thought a disease, and the CBC has had a role in encouraging this type of dangerous polarization. Again, as I've talked about before in previous videos, this type of language is dehumanizing people, and it only seems to surface when our worst tribalistic evolutionary programming is allowed to flourish. Alright, as always, thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. As I mentioned earlier, this is likely going to be a series of videos, so make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of the additional content. And until next time, this has been The Golden Door.